Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really absolutely fascinating lady to introduce you to tonight. Debbie Travis is her name. You've probably heard of her, seen of her, maybe read one of her books. She just finished a Canadian book tour and went back just yesterday to Tuscany, where she lives. And it's a real pleasure to meet you, Debbie. I've followed a little bit of your career, and I've always been interested as I've read some things about joy and some of your very positive outlooks on life, your retreats in Tuscany, I understand, or something like this. I want to know more about you and about the book and what motivates you. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Brian. Thank you. Yes, I'm in a little jet lagged in my villa in Tuscany. So, well, I had 25 years on television, making TV shows across the US and Canada, and then producing many other lifestyle shows, some cooking shows and property shows and food. And around about 15 years ago, I was in the middle of a big production for CBC, and I just had this horrible feeling. I'm done. I'm just, I'd led the way. I guess everybody says I was the pioneer for lifestyle programming. And it was an amazing, amazing journey. And I just felt, you know what? I think I'm ready for something else. And I was at the stage in my life where, kids were going off to university. So I didn't have to abandon them. And we had been filming in Italy several times for my shows, and really fallen in love with the culture and the way of life and food and, of course, the wine. And we had a dream, like a lot of people, of like, what would it be like one day to get a little house here? And like most real estate stories, you start off looking for a one-bedroom flat and you end up with a 40-bedroom monastery. And we looked for a long, long time, and we eventually found a little piece of heaven. It was not what I was looking for. It's an enormous, enormous property. But the view here, and it was just completely derelict. It had started off in the 13th century as a lookout tower. And eventually, I think it probably became a ruin for a few hundred years. And then a poor farm from the early 1600s. And then it was never really a villa. It's what I call my villa. And it was a renovation that I never expected. My shows were on in Italy at the time, and builders and locals would say, "Oh, you can do this." I renovated television shows, not at this level. But we decided it made us feel so good here that we would share it. And so we opened up to doing retreats, again, in the early days when people thought the word retreat was some kind of religious thing. And of course, now every Tom, Dick and Harry is doing retreats. But we opened up our home, and we have 14 suites, mostly in pigsties. So everybody gets their own entrance and their own private garden, and we sit on 100 acres of olive groves. Mostly, well, we produce olive oil, and we've just at the moment finished picking, and that oil is going to be making its way in a couple of days across the pond to everybody in Canada. We sell it directly to people's door, and it's right off the tree, and it's probably the best olive oil you'll ever taste. So that's kind of what we're doing.
I want some. How do I order it?
Well, if you want to order oil, you have to order it very soon, because once it's gone, it's gone. We don't have a middleman. We don't sell to stores. So we sell mostly to people who come back every year. And you just go on our website. You just go to debbietravis.com. You put in your order, and people start ordering. We open up the orders in July. Obviously months before we pick. And then, of course, I get panic emails from people in September going, "I haven't had my oil." No, haven't picked it yet. So we start picking mid-October, and it takes us about a month. And we've just, like I said, we've just finished. And then we press it and bottle it. And it's organic. We don't spray. We have the European seal on it, and it goes like hotcakes. And so you put it in now, and we'll ship it. We pay the shipping, and it comes straight to your door.
Fantastic. What a great,
And once you've had it, you'll never go back to a supermarket. It's impossible to have supermarket rubbish, which it is, and not what it says it often is. And also oil is kind of the opposite of wine, whereas wine, as we know, gets more robust, the longer you have it. Olive oil actually gets the nutrients go down. So if most oil in your store is about 2 years old, it's not going to do you any harm. And remember, the expiry date is set by a government. So what you want to really see on good oil is the harvest date. I want to know the date the oil was picked. So ours will say November 24. So the polynutrients, which are what are so good and make olive oil a superfood, get weaker as the year go on. So we say, when you first get our oil, use it for dipping, for salads, for, putting a teaspoon in the morning. And then, in a couple of months, maybe March, maybe cook with it or vinaigrette, but, really enjoy this extraordinary taste, which you will never see from a supermarket because it's actually quite spicy. And the reason we sell out is because people come back every year. That's their oil for the year. And because it's before the holidays, it makes, if you want to give it away. First year, everybody says, oh, I'm going to give it as Christmas presents. The second year, they're saying, not a chance.
I want it myself.
Yeah, I want it myself. So it's a hobby for us. We also produce wine, which is ghastly, probably the worst and most expensive wine you'll ever taste. We are not good winemakers, so we're kind of abandoning that now. I think I'm going to sell my grapes next year for vinegar. But so we haven't been very successful with that. But we have a lot of land. We have extraordinary views, and it's a lovely lifestyle here. It's beautiful, wonderful.
Fantastic. Now, just to orient us, Tuscany is just outside of Florence.
Well, Florence is in Tuscany. So Tuscany is a state, is a province. It's a large province. So it's divided into 3 areas. It's divided into Chianti. So Florence is the main city at the north end of Chianti. Then you have Siena at the other end of Chianti, so 2 famous Renaissance towns. And then you have the Maremma, and that's the area that a lot of people don't ever go to, not tourists anyway, and that's the coast. And the coast is very long, amazing beaches, very unspoilt, and the Italians go on holiday there. It's just beginning, because North Americans tend to go to Amalfi and the Cinque Terre, but there are so many beaches in Italy because it's a peninsula. And then there's the Val d'Orcia, and the Val d'Orcia is where we are, and the Val d'Orcia is the postcard. This is where you have these rolling hills that look like somebody's thrown velvet across them. The lines of cypress trees, umbrella trees, and some of the best wines in the world. So if you Google Tuscany, the pictures you'll see are my backyard.
Fantastic. Wonderful. We're going to talk about the book next. What's the book that you've just launched?
So the book came out a week ago. It's a bestseller. It's called Laugh More, Stories from an Unexpected Life. And I did a book in 2018 called Design Your Next Chapter. And that was about making the leap. Not that everybody wants to go and live in Tuscany, but so many people might have had one job, one career. So they could have been a surgeon, and then they decide, I want to own a coffee shop. I've done it. I've done my, I've turned 50. I've done my years in the medical world, and I just want to do something different. And I found so many people to interview who had done this, and I'd done the same thing. I turned 50, and I said, I want to do something completely different. I started at the BBC when I was 24. And so I'd been in television all my adult life, really.
You started as a model, I understand?
Well, I started as a model very young, like 16. I left home at 16, and I did a lot of television commercials. And while I was doing the TV commercials, I was fascinated by the set, what was going on. And modeling's not, the most exciting job in the world. And I remember on one job in Amsterdam asking somebody, there was this gorgeous woman, a very old lady. She was like 24.
Very
You
old.
know, yeah, I was like 18. I said, what's her job? Because she had this clipboard. And they said, oh, she's a producer. I said, wow, how do you become a producer? And they basically told me, you know, you go through this route and hang around the pubs in London where the producers and the television people are. And I did, and I started working my way up. And then I ended up going to the Cannes Film Festival and was very unprofessional and met a Canadian on the first night and married him 3 weeks later. So that was that.
Hold it. You met someone at the Cannes Film Festival and married him 3 weeks later?
Don't do that at home. You should have a warning sign on it. So yes, and I moved to Montreal where he lived, and he was a distributor of movies, and found myself in another country. 29 years old, couldn't work in television because I didn't speak French, and not in Montreal anyway. And so I started painting houses, and basically, I got a bucket and a ladder, and everybody was doing these paint finishes, in those days. So I literally had this booming business, and then suddenly 2 children. And then after a few years of basically smelling like paint thinner, my children obviously saying, "Mummy stinks." I made a video. It was the time of the how-to video, Jane Fonda and all that kind of stuff. So I knew how to make stuff. So I made this video and I sold 1 million copies. And I started off on radio shows like this, where the interviewer sounded, I remember one interviewer sounding, "This sounds about as interesting as watching paint dry," but all these lines were going on, red, 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 red. And people were ringing from on top of a ladder going, "I need to speak to Debbie. How do I do this? How do I do this?" And it exploded. And then I started to get invited across America and Canada onto talk shows. And this went on for a couple of years until finally the cable networks were beginning, and they exploded in the mid to the end of the 90s. And one day a producer came down and said, "Look, we've got this television show. All we're running is reruns of old shows. Would you turn this into a TV show?" And I'm like, "A show about paint?" And I started a show called The Painted House. And within 4 months, it was partnered with This Old House, which was a hugely successful show for guys on PBS. And I became the girls' side of it. And then it was sold within that year to 80, 90 countries worldwide. And from there, my publisher, Penguin Random House, came in New York, and I did a whole series of design books. And then I did this book called Design Your Next Chapter. And then I did another book in 21 called Joy, which was coming out of the questions we get when people come to our retreats. And we hold retreats about 10, 15 times a year, and people change within 3 days. Their skin is good. They look amazing. They look happier. But then on the last day, they get upset and they're like, "It's okay for you. You've got a vegetable garden. You've got these beautiful views. You live near a medieval village. How do I bring this home to my condo in Toronto, for instance?" And so we found a way of bottling this by writing Joy. It's a beautifully photographed book of these 10 lessons of the Tuscan lifestyle, which is really a time warp here. And it's how our grandparents lived. So people live in the moment. They walk everywhere. They meet their friends. There's a great community. The food is in season. And this is how you get vitality and joy. And so that was Joy. That was that book. And then this book that's just come out last week on the 22nd of October is people laugh a lot here. And laughing, I really do think, is a medicine. And when we do retreats, I don't do anything special. I mean, we have experts here and yoga people and meditation and all this kind of stuff, but it's actually people doing it themselves, people, no phones, people meeting new people, coming alone. And these, like my husband often says, "What are they talking about? They talk through yoga, they talk through breakfast, they talk through the hikes." And it's what people do well, especially women, they mend through chatting together. And so I wrote a book about funny stories here because it's like living in a central casting. The locals are bonkers, mad as a box of frogs, as we say in the UK. So I divided the book up into a year here. So it's a
Can I
year.
interrupt? I apologize. We've got to take a break for a message, but this is fascinating. What incredible life you've had. What, the career is interesting, but the life is even more interesting. Just fascinating. And I think joy is something that all of us could use a lot more of right now, let me tell you.
Right now. Yeah.
We got to take a break for some messages. We're going to come back in just 2 minutes with Debbie Travis talking about her Canadian book tour, her books, her life in Tuscany, and everything. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Debbie Travis. You've probably seen her on TV or cable or read her books or heard stories about her. And I was intrigued because I read this book about joy that was, on someone's, I didn't buy it. I have to admit, I didn't buy it. It was on someone's coffee table. And I was fascinated by it. And I really quite enjoyed it. And so I'm really eager to hear about this book, about your current book, about laughing and stories. Tell us about this current book, please.
So this book starts in January. It's a year here. So I wrote it as it was happening. And, we do live in this area of kind of central casting. There's a lot of characters live around here. The average age, I think, in my village is about 85. It's wacky. And, there are pros and cons of living in Italy. The bureaucracy will bring you to your knees. But there's a kindness here I have 11 front doors around, all glass, around the main villa. That's just in one house, 11. So you can't walk around in your knickers because somebody will turn up at the door with some eggs or some oil and you're half naked. It's your home. And you're like, oops, hi, good morning. And so stuff happens. And so I started writing these stories down as they happened. And when you're writing a story down, it suddenly triggers stories about your past. So, for instance, I'd be writing about in spring the wildness of the artichoke season, because there are 200 varieties of artichokes here, and people, the little old ladies in the market, will fight over, the perfect artichoke for the perfect pasta sauce, or some of them, the particular ones like a golf ball, they eat raw. And as I was writing this funny story of what happened in the market one day, I remembered that when I was 18, I was nearly killed by an artichoke. And so I wrote that story down. And then I decided, well, I better put an artichoke recipe in. So there's recipes in the book as well. And so, one story, it's just like we're talking now, one story leads to another. It's a bit all over the map, and it takes you back in time. So I didn't expect it really to be a memoir. But it did in the end, because I kept, some of the stories are a little poignant about, hard times growing up in the north of England. But most of them are really quite funny, I hope, and quite unbelievable, because my editor would say, so that really happened? And I was like, oh yeah, here's the newspaper cutting of where it happened. And, several times I nearly ended up in jail over my life, and not through any fault of my own, but just being a scatty girl. But so there's some of those stories in, and the wonder of people and how funny people are. And then we decided with this book we would illustrate it. So there's a woman in Florence who's Australian, and she's an incredible artist, and she artist illustrator, and she takes some art classes at our villa when we have guests here. She teaches them how to paint the landscape and do some wonderful illustrations. So I worked very closely with her, and we illustrated the book, and it's amazing. And it was a process I'd never done before. So I would, my grandmother was a gold smuggler and so badly behaved and did end up in jail. And I'd send her a picture. She lived in the south of France. I'd send her a paragraph about my granny, who was only like 48 or something at the time. And then she would send this illustration back. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my granny, in this poochy, Gucci outfit with a long cigarette holder, a floppy hat, and big glasses, and so we had a lot of fun designing the illustrations because they just go with the humor of the book. And I think this is a book to curl up with a glass of wine and just have a good laugh, and enjoy it. And as you say, in these times. We need to laugh a bit. So it is stories from an unexpected life, because none of what I've done was ever expected. It all just happened by accident.
200 different types of artichoke? Seriously? Who
Yeah.
knew?
It's like potatoes, it's like onions, what we're limited to in North America, which has a pretty dreadful diet. It's why the Mediterranean diet is so good, is a lot of these varieties by the big food companies have been killed off. So, potatoes, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Peru, but there are about 500 types of potatoes in Peru where they originated from. And I think we're down to 3 in North America. It's the same with the wheat here. The wheat is different from the wheat that you eat. That's why more people have issues with gluten in North America than they do in Italy, because it's actually not only different wheat, and it's protected because food is a religion in Italy. There are laws, strict laws to protect the quality of the grain and quality of things like beans. In fact, in Tuscany, they're known as bean people because they eat so many varieties of beans and lentils and chickpeas and stuff because it was cheap. They were poor.
Right.
It's now a very wealthy region, but it was very, very poor if you were in the countryside at one point. So they ate a cheaper food, and they didn't eat much fish because it's in the center of the country where I am. So, of course, fish in the old days would have gone off because there was no refrigeration. So they're real traditionalists. So they eat wild boar. They eat, lots and lots of beans, and they eat in seasons. So we're eating if you go to a restaurant here now, there'll be mushrooms on every single, course. If you go in May, you'll never see a mushroom here. You're craving mushrooms in the rest of the year because they don't eat out of season. You can't get the food because they don't import food. They eat what they grow. And that's why people live with this great vitality. And when I wrote Joy, that was one of these Tuscan lessons, and you can do it. It can be a little boring, but it's definitely more flavorful. So in the winter, if you say you're in Canada, you eat a lot of like your grandparents did, stews and parsnips and potatoes and that kind of stuff. You eat strawberries in the winter, they're going to taste like water, because they're coming in from a country where they've probably sprayed them to death, and or they've ripened on a lorry, on a truck. So it is a form of having a longevity in your life, is to eat as fresh as you can. Everybody's into labeling themselves vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian. That's fine. But it's the quality of the food that matters. You can be vegan, but not if you're eating it all out of a supermarket. You've got to put a bit more work in. And so the more, it's really working at being your own warrior and trying to eat a healthy diet with local food. And there are great farms in Canada, which need supporting. And I think everybody needs to find their local organic farm and support them and get as much as you can. Of course, it's more expensive. And there are some foods that you don't need to buy organic, like an avocado or a banana or a coconut, because there's such thick skins. But of course, grapes and apples, it's imperative because they've got more pesticides, I think, on an apple than anything else. So, you've got to, I mean, I was in Toronto last week and I saw in a supermarket an apple with a label on that said vegan. I mean, like, seriously? Like, of course it's vegan,
What else
but
would it be?
yeah, but it's gone a bit mad, I think, hasn't it? But if you put the same energy into just buying quality, make your own hummus. Because again, a lot of processed foods, which is now, the ultra processed food, is now the big thing. And a lot of it, it's more expensive, but they're using bad oils, And so if you're going to eat things like hummus, or, vegan, that kind of vegan food, you can make it yourself at a fraction of the cost, but you can use olive oil and lemon and organic chickpeas rather than whatever's in that little container that's $6.
Tell me about joy. It's one of those things that we've talked about a lot. The cover story of the Toronto newspaper this weekend was about Taylor Swift coming and how she's all about joy. I went to Bruce Springsteen last weekend, and I
Oh,
can't tell you how
lovely.
many people had one of the best nights of their year, if not longer than their year, because they were just reliving their teenagehoods and young adulthoods, reliving all the Springsteen stories and songs. Tell me about joy.
Well, I think joy, I mean, yes, I wrote the book Joy, but also I think joy is about many different things. If you're not healthy and you're sick, it's hard to have a lot of joy in your life. So you need to try and get healthy, and put the effort into really studying food. No, don't listen to what the newspapers say. You do the research on food, and there is so much out there. You have to watch out. There's all these documentaries out there on different types of food. Just check who made them. People will twist it. The newspaper may say eggs are in, written by the egg board, meat's in, written by the meat board. You have to do your own studying. But joy is also something that I think we all want to bring more into our lives. And one of the best ways is, like you just said, you went to a concert. The last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I have sat in theatres across Canada talking and telling funny stories that are in this book, listening to, women, some of who brought their daughters who were 18, 19, 20 years old, roaring with laughter. And I remember one woman coming up to me last week and saying, I haven't seen my daughter laugh like that, for months. And so you're just telling funny stories. And so joy and laughter is a medicine, and getting out there. You went to see a concert. So yes, it's an all-round happy occasion because you got out of the house, you could listen to some favorite music, memories came back, you were with other people. And we all know how joyless COVID was, because we were stuck at home. Even if you were stuck with people you loved, it was pretty joyless. You wanted to be out there. Now the Italians are out there. In fact, they have a word, passeggiata. Passeggiata means the walk at the end of the day. Everybody who can move in this country, doesn't matter if they're in the city of Milan or they're in a country village like mine, they go out for a walk at 6 o'clock. Depending on the time of the year, it might be a bit earlier now, it's getting darker, but they go, rain or shine, they go for a walk and they walk with their friends. So teenagers will be messing around, going with their buddies, mums with the strollers, grannies, men sitting on walls, chatting away, and then they go for an aperitivo, and then they go and have dinner. And that is not just once a week or once a month. This is every single night. It is a way of life. It makes you move. It doesn't have to be a jog. It's just a walk with your friends. And this goes on everywhere. And if you go to the middle of Milan, people are all dressed up and it's like, whoa, look what she's wearing. Look at those boots. It may be in a village life here talking about the latest fertilizer. It doesn't matter. It gets you out. And when I talk to women about this, the best example is saying girls' night out. Girls' night out is something that women, sometimes it can take you months to plan a girls' night out. And what does every woman do when she comes home? She says, God, why don't we do that every week? I feel amazing. I ate 4 desserts. I drank too much wine. We talked over each other. We had the best time. We laughed till we cried. We gossiped. We did this. And we feel good because it's a scientific thing. We created endorphins, which flooded our bodies, and we feel as good as if we'd taken a drug or something. And this is something we're not doing. And loneliness and being alone is detrimental. It's the complete opposite of that. And that makes us sick. And now we know. Science is proving that people who are lonely of all ages, and they're getting younger and younger, their health deteriorates. We need to be with people. All those people who are working at home, make an effort to, you know, to close your computer, go for a walk, sit in. I mean, I was in Toronto, every cafe, nobody talked to them. You go in the coffee shop here and my head hurts because of the noise level. Not in Toronto. Everybody was on their laptops.
No,
Everybody.
it's shocking that, you go to these coffee shops, everyone's, in a coffee shop, but they're not talking to anyone else. Like, why go to a coffee shop? Just stay at home.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's like they're craving to be part of a community, but they don't actually do anything to create that community.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. I went with a friend in Toronto to a very nice little coffee shop, and we were rabbiting on for like an hour, like chatting, catching up, two women and stuff. And either side of us were two young women. That afternoon, I got a message on Instagram from one of them who said, I was sitting beside you, and I was just flabbergasted about what fun you were having and talking and things like that. And she said you were talking about that you were looking for an event manager, and that's what I do. And I wrote back to her rather meanly, and I said, why would you not say hello? Why would you not introduce yourself, say, I'm sorry not to bother you, but I just wanted to say hello. You kind of lost an opportunity there. And that generation, they're just not understanding that, or they're afraid, or they're nervous. What's the worst can happen? We turn around and say, you know, get lost, well, yeah, maybe we're horrible and we might do that. But unless you try and reach out to others, you're going to get, more and more isolated, which is what they are. And it upset me a lot because she was sitting a foot away from us.
And didn't make a move. We're going to have to take, excuse me, another break for some messages and come back. And I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about this Find Your Next Chapter, because I think that's something a lot of us want to do, but not many of us actually do. We just sort of get on this treadmill and never get off. Stay with us, everyone. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with Debbie Travis, who's just finished a Canadian book tour about her new book, which is all about laughing more and some great stories about her life. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Debbie Travis is my guest tonight. She's an author. She's was a model. She maybe you still are a model. I don't know. And you've got a villa in Tuscany. She does retreats. She had some very popular shows on TV, on cable. She's written some books. And one of the books I wanted to ask you about before we go back to your current book, if we could, is this book about developing your next chapter. Tell us about the book. What's it called, where we can get it, and what was your message? And I understand you had, what was it, 10 lessons in the book?
No, that was the 10 lessons was in Joy. So the book before Joy. So Laugh More is the book I've just written. Joy came out 2 years ago, and 2 years before that came Design Your Next Chapter, which was a huge bestseller because I think it hit a point for so many people. So what I did was I took my journey of having this dream and then doing the work and then living with the consequences. So those are the three things. So everybody has a dream or an idea. Wouldn't it be amazing one day if I did this, this, and this? So I wrote my dream, which was of buying a place in Tuscany. And then, of course, 5 years of renovating and then opening it up as retreats. But the difficult thing for me was I was in the process of a big national, not cable, big national show on CBC, 9 o'clock time slot, huge pressure, enormous budget. And I started this dream. And I like to think of it as like a bridge. You're walking from one life to the next. So it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Have I done the right thing? Oh my God. I mean, I was literally living on a hillside, sometimes in the pouring rain in January and February. The phone was ringing, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this show? Do you want to do, all these opportunities, which I didn't want to do because I was in the middle of the renovation and I kind of committed. Every penny I had was going into this, huge project. And while I was writing about this, I started to get attracted to other people's next chapters. So it's like buying a new car. You buy a red Audi, and then you start seeing other cars, and you're like, oh, she's got it in blue. I like it in blue. And he's got it in green. You start noticing it where you might not have noticed that car before. So I started to notice stories in the newspaper or on the radio about people from different countries who had literally leapt from one career into another. So they may have like I have a great friend, an Irish friend, who was a surgeon at McGill in Montreal, and she literally decided that she wanted to sing. And she made it happen. She gave up medicine. So there's a lot of things you have to do. There's a lot of timing. If you've got 4 kids under 6, it might not be the time to say Mummy's giving up her job. You may have worked for the bank for 20 years and you think, I don't think I can do another day. So then, of course, you've got to plan it, how you do it financially. And how it all works. So that's what it was a wonderful book to do, because I did tour with that book, and people would turn up with so many post-it notes stuck inside it. They couldn't even shut the book because it really resonated with them about, we all want to do something. We all have that, oh, I would love to own a hotel, or I would love to be a yoga teacher. I would, can I do it? When do I do it? Do I have the stamina to do it? It was fascinating for me to write, and it was fascinating to meet people on a book tour who were either just dreaming or they were ready to do it. And by including the stories in the book. So, like, for instance, there was a woman who came to our retreat from Toronto, and we have a beautiful kitchen garden. And this woman kept disappearing, right? And she'd disappear for hours. And one day I found she'd put a bench inside the kitchen garden and she was sitting on it. So I went over to her and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes." She said, she was very serious, a little teary. And she said, "This is my happy place." I said, "What, being in Tuscany?" She said, "No. This garden surrounded by eggplants and green beans and, whatever." And I said, "Really?" She said, I want this. I want to do this. So what she wanted to do was open up vegetable gardens. So she came back to Toronto. She was in her mid-40s. She was single, so she didn't have anybody else to ask. She sold her apartment. With the money from a very expensive apartment, she bought some land in a place called Prince Edward County, which I don't know if you know, but it's outside Toronto. And she put in vegetable gardens, and it took her a couple of years, and now she's selling them to all the organic restaurants. I mean, it's just incredible. And she made it happen. She worked out what she could borrow, what she could beg, how she could do this, worked incredibly hard. So there are stories in that book, how other people did things. My story is Tuscany. Other people's story. We had a woman who in Norway who was young, and she had done 7 years of dentistry school. And she said, the first day on the job, the first mouth she looked in, she said, "Nah, I'm not ready for this." She said, "I want to go to the Antarctic." And she was working, when I met her, I interviewed her over the phone. She was working on one of the last stations where they're counting the penguins and stuff. And she showers every 2 weeks when a cruise ship comes in, and she runs the post office there. I mean, it was like bizarre. And she said, I'll go back to dentistry. I just wasn't ready. I wanted to live an adventure. So people change chapters at different ages, different times in their lives, and for different reasons. And I think there are so many people who are doing jobs that are maybe mundane, and they're dreaming away. And you can keep dreaming for years. I had this dream of Tuscany for over 10 years, and I had a vision board. I put up pictures of what I wanted. I couldn't do it. I couldn't afford to do it in those days. I had a family at school, but the minute they left home, I'm like, right, I'm off.
I'm off. But Debbie, so many people, have dreams, but they're completely dreams, maybe daydreams, and never come close to reality. What is it that can actually turn that dream into reality? Like, is it a kick in the pants? Is it a crisis? Is it kids moving off to school? What is it?
Well, I call it dream it, do it, live it. So the dreaming it, we can all dream. Dreams cost nothing. And as you say, they can be daydreams, they can be one, but it might be something that you just keep thinking, God, I'd love to do this. And you just stick stuff up on a board where you're going to see it every day in your office or in the loo or wherever, that it keeps it ignited. Now, the dream may change. And then when you actually make that decision, you have to do the work. And the work is, how are you going to do it? You know, what's the cost of doing it? What can go wrong? And of all the hundreds of people I interviewed for this book, not one of them regretted it. But a lot of them said it wasn't the dream, the path that they'd originally followed. It had gone off into another direction, you know? So you might have this dream of doing one thing, but if you don't take the path, nothing will ever happen. You've got to get off the Googling. You've got to get off you've got to actually do it. Find the right time. And then also you have to look at, I remember a woman who was 70 who'd started a makeup line in her late 60s. And she said something very wise. She said she was widowed. All she really had in collateral was her home, which she sold to do this. And she said, the one thing you have to do is if you lose all that money in this new venture and you are not young enough to start again, it's kind of, you know, put all your eggs in one basket. It could be rather dangerous. You might end up on the street. So she said, what I did was, she said, I used a third of the money from the sale of my house. I downsized. I hired a 15-year-old, a next door neighbor's kid, to do all my internet and build my website. I found a local scientist who wanted to partner with me and make this stuff. And when I met her, she was leaving the next day for the Oscars because she was putting in all these products into the gift bags that they give out to the movie stars. And she'd only been doing it 3 years and she made it happen. And she said, I did this because I could not walk through another department store with some 19-year-old girl telling me if I used this cream, I was going to look like her, because I was not going to look like her. You know, I was 70 years old. And I thought it was amazing. She said, what else am I going to do? Sit and watch television all day? She made a new career. I've met people who, on this book tour I've just done now, how many people in the audience said, how do you do a book? You just write. Write. You want to write a book? Then write. But we all have excuses. People tell me every single what do you call it? Customs person. You go through customs and they say, why are you here? Oh, I've written a book. All of them say the same thing. Oh, I want to write a book. Then write it.
Just
You
do
know,
it. We got to
just
take a final
do it.
break and we're going to come back and we're going to chat about this current book. And maybe you'll read a little bit from it. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes.
Right. So you
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Debbie Travis with us tonight. She is a hugely popular, sought-after public speaker and author, a magical mix of her British wit, unique ideas, enthusiasm, and down-to-earth advice ensures that Debbie's seminars and her books are spectacular, and we've been chatting about all of them tonight. Debbie, remind us the name of this current book that you just finished the tour of.
It's called Laugh More, Stories from an Unexpected Life.
Laugh More. I love it. Can you share one of the stories or read one of the stories?
Okay, well, I can, you know, I've told these stories so many times. I'll just tell you. So some of the stories are quite poignant and they make you think. So when I was my mother was widowed at 33. My father died at 39, and my mum was left with 4 children. My brother was 6 months old. I was the eldest, and I was 12. And you know, things were not easy, but we had a decent sized house, but no money. So my mum took in lodgers. And she would make them breakfast, evening meal, and do their laundry. So one day I came home from school, and all the kids had been bunked into one room, and these 2 men had the other rooms and a bathroom. And I came home from my mum was a lovely smell. She was frying at the stove onions. And I said, oh, Mum, that smells good. What are you making? She said, I'm making a shepherd's pie. And as she said it, I looked at the counter, and there were 2 empty tins of dog food. and we did not have a dog. And I remember standing there going, oh no, you know how embarrassed you are. I was probably 13 at the time. And I was like, what? We're all going to go to jail. And my mum said, with some peas and fried onions, they'll never know the difference. So she hadn't got enough money for meat. So she'd use dog food. And so I really thought we'd all go to jail. So these men were sitting in the dining room, tucking into the shepherd's pie, and I sat on the stairs waiting for, the police to come type of thing, terribly nervous. And one of the men came out and said, oh, would you ask your mother if there's any more? That was so delicious. So, to me, it's a funny story. It wasn't funny at the time, but it's a story of survival, getting on with things. Obviously, they're not going to die eating dog food. And I'm sure it tasted delicious, peas and onions and lots of Worcestershire sauce. But, so it's sometimes if we can laugh at our mistakes, laugh at the hard times and share them with other people, it is medicine.
What a great story. And sounds like a fantastic book. Where can people get it?
Well, you can get it everywhere. Bookstores, Amazon. Yeah, any bookstore near you will have it.
I've got to ask you before we go, what about the seminar? If I want to come for a seminar, what do I do? How do I sign up? And what will happen at a seminar?
So here we do, for men, we do classic car rallies. So we have the cars. You get to drive about 30 different cars. We have everything from Austin Healey's to old Ferraris. They're all classics, Maseratis, Rolls Royce, whatever. So you stay in beautiful accommodation here. We have gourmet chefs. We go to Michelin-starred restaurants, and you get to experience Tuscany from behind the wheels of a beautiful car. And we started this in 21, and it's a way of us having guys here as well. So often it's couples, or it might be two women or two men or whatever. And it is it's a holiday of a lifetime. It's an adventure from morning till night. And we did the last one in October, and just before I left for the book tour, and a man came up to me and he said, the last time the muscles in my face hurt like this was on my wedding day, because they're smiling all day. So we have 6 mechanics, a flatbed, because somebody always ends up in a farmyard, and we drive towards the coast, we drive into the mountains, we drive into Chianti, and you're switching cars every 2 hours. So there's a lot of rallies here, but these people own the cars. They're part of clubs. So when people come on holiday to Italy, they see these lines of Porsches or a line of Ferraris and think, oh, wouldn't it be great to do that? But I suddenly said, well, if we supply the cars and the insurance, and all you have to do is bring the smiles and your driving license, it's a wonderful, wonderful experience.
So how many cars do you own?
Oh, I don't own them. God, there are millions of dollars worth of cars. So we linked up with a guy in France who has about 200. So we choose which ones we want and then bring them here for the season. And then he brings his team of mechanics. They're all specialists in old cars. And in the morning that you wake up to, they're filling the cars, starting them up, polishing them. All the guys are out, all the guests are out there chatting away and, sipping coffee while the men get ready. And then you choose a car, and then we have a pit stop. Everybody switches and choose another car. And, people have their favorites. Some cars, we've got a Cobra that's quite challenging. Some people love the challenge. Other people would rather drive the Mercedes, and so it's a real adventure. Very, very exciting.
So Debbie, you talked to us about laughing more. You've talked about good food. You've talked about community. You've talked about going for a daily walk. What was the term for a daily walk, by the way?
It's an Italian word, passeggiata. So it's the walk. It's the evening walk that everybody takes.
You've talked about finding, dreaming about, and then actually making a reality of your new chapter, your next chapter. And you talked about joy. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. And hopefully Debbie and the show today can add a little joy to your life and maybe motivate you for thinking
And
about
make you
the
make
next
you laugh
chapter of this.
more. Make you
And
laugh
laugh
more.
more. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Debbie.